Greetings, Poe fans. Welcome to another edition of Poe Unplugged. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I am Jeanie Smith, and we are
The Potastic Two.
Come zoom with us into the Unbook Club dedicated to the works of Mr. Edgar Allan Poe.
Good evening, and welcome back to Poe Unplugged. Tonight we are talking about Poe's one and only novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. It's like, he wrote the one, he was going to make the title long enough for no one to forget it. Jeanie, do you want to start?
Well, I was going to say that Nantucket, the first thing that pops into my head is the Wings comedy.
Yes.
About Nantucket,
Yes.
And I'm like, well, I think it was his one and only homage, in my opinion, to his home. Not really being an island, but Massachusetts is surrounded by all those islands and all that kind of thing. So that's the first thing that hit it off with me, is like, oh, he's actually setting it close to home for a change.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. And what's really cool is that last year, Jeff and I were able to go to Martha's Vineyard, where Edgartown, we didn't get to go to Nantucket, but we're going to plan a trip there. But, he mentions it in the book, and it's like, all of it is real, to me now, especially going there. And we went more for the Jaws aspect, but I'm not going to get into this tonight necessarily, but there's some parallels to Jaws from this story, but anyway, that's a whole nother discussion we're going to save for later. So, and I think we have a new person. Tommy, is it Kirshner?
Yes.
Hey, Tommy. Well, welcome to Poe Unplugged. We just got started and we really haven't even gotten into the discussion. So welcome aboard.
Thank you.
So, yeah, Jeanie, I agree. Yeah, Poe kept it, right in his own backyard. Jeanie?
I'm coming. I thought you were going to finish saying something. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump out on the limb here, because the first thing that hits me once more is Poe being in this story of running away. He's wanting to go. He's wanting to set off into an adventure. He's stowing away on a ship. Now, I agree, because I love, that's one of the things I love, is being on a boat. I've taken 15 cruises. I've been on the yachts out of Massachusetts, and the big yachts that they used to have back in the day, kind of like we're talking about in the story. And I can see the thrill, and I can see his ideas of wanting to get away, and the only way to escape is to hide. But I love how it goes from him hiding and stowing away to a mutiny. So we got the, mutiny on the Bounty going on, which I was going to look up when that was written, because I'm pretty sure it was after this one. Anybody help me out there?
Yeah, because Mutiny on the Bounty.
Yeah, Mutiny on the Bounty.
I think that was after.
Yeah, I was pretty sure it was like after the Civil War, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've read it.
Let's see. October 1932, romantic novel by Charles Nordhoff and James Norman Hall. Yeah, 1932.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it struck me there with the Mutiny on the Bounty. So I was like, ooh, I wonder if they got influenced by Poe, since this was his one and only novel, because there's so much to unpack in this story that has so many lines to things. Like Carmen and I were discussing before we got on here, Pirates of the Caribbean is, yelling at me right now, because they're going to islands and they're meeting people that, don't like them, and they don't like them, and they try to destroy them, and all that comes to be. So there's a lot of mix of the supernatural, a lot of mix of things that was going on in that time, because piracy was on the high seas everywhere in this time period, especially around Tripoli and around the Mediterranean and those areas. You had a lot of piracy, especially when you had a lot of warlords that were running the countries at the time. And so, but I just liked that it started off with like that romanticism of, running away and reaching for something and seeking something and wanting to experience things. And then all of a sudden, as with Poe, it takes a major veer and you're like, oh shit, I'm going to be dead. I'm going to die here with no, and of course he brought an animal, or there was an animal along there, and I'm rooting for the animal, saying, don't kill the animal. Don't you dare.
Well, and
Like,
speaking of Tiger,
I know how you are, Poe.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, speaking of Tiger, with there's also that, influence on the author of Life of Pi. The name escapes me right now, but there's that link. And Tiger, after the big mutiny and saves, both Pym and Augustus, he disappears. No one really knows what happened. Again, that's my Jaws tie, because the dog in Jaws, you don't know what really happened. Sorry, I had to throw that in. But
So,
yeah, I want
about
for
the
dog
dog
too. Yeah, go ahead, Holly.
So I do apologize. I did not get a chance to reread this, but I think I've read this novel either 3 or 4 times. So if I make a little, if I say something incorrect, someone correct me. So the first time I read this book, when the dog went MIA halfway through the story, because to me I kind of view it almost like a part 1, part 2.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, Edgar Allan Poe is so exacting with all his words. I feel like he sat there choosing the perfect thing. I was like, there's no way that he made this kind of mistake that normally would be picked up in today in the modern world by any sort of editor. If anybody else read the book, we all were like, okay, what happened to the dogs? I was like, there's no way. So I thought it was the edition I had. So I got a different edition, and I reread it right away, looking for why is this missing? How could he not do this? But guys, so I don't know if anybody else is as crazy as I am. There's light at the end of the tunnel. There's been multiple books written by other authors that continue the story.
Yes.
Jules Verne.
Yes.
So I read that, and an Arctic adventure. Jules Verne does save the day. I was thinking that when Jules Verne is writing Edgar Allan Poe, this beautiful love letter, he saves the day and he continues the story so we can learn what happens to the dog. So if you're interested, check it out, because I thought that was kind of cool for me, that he actually kind of correct. I don't want to say it's an error, but realistically it was, right?
Yeah.
So he kind of corrects that for him, which I just think is so sweet. And then really, since we're talking about other editions afterwards, there is another one that's called A Strange Discovery. I don't know if anybody on here has read that one.
Who's it by?
Charles, I actually looked this up before so I can say it. It's Charles Ramen, ramen noodle, Dake, D-A-K-E. Funny enough, I came across this randomly when I was searching Edgar Allan Poe, and I read it because I was after this book, I don't want to get too into, because I know some of us hadn't had a chance to read it, but this ends in a very classic Edgar Allan Poe way, and you're kind of doing the WTF moment. So I went on this search to try to find answers. This book is kind of funny. It's the only novel that Charles ever wrote. And I actually thought he was a modern author. So I was gonna send this guy an email, right? Because I'm crazy. And then I realized this was written hundreds of years ago as well. But it was the only book he ever wrote. And I enjoyed the telling. It's very, very different than Jules Verne's version of what would happen next. But it's definitely, in my opinion, worth a read for us Edgar Allan Poe fans once you get past this, and you kind of just want that. If you're not satisfied with the story, which I can talk about that more later, I want to keep talking. But yeah, so it's kind of cool.
Okay. Yeah.
All because of the dog.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Because we want Tiger to live.
Yeah. So because he's so cool, and honestly, I thought he was one of my favorite characters. Especially because of the kind of dog he is. You don't really hear too many stories. In modern books, there's always some tiny little poodle puppy, and this is one of those big river dogs, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah. So. What other thoughts did you guys have on any parts of it?
Where was the cat? That was my thought, because you got a dog, but in those days, I mean, that's how we have domesticated cats now, is because they would put cats on ships because they'd have to
Yep.
have to keep the mice down and,
Yep.
eat, keep them from eating the food and all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, dude, you got a dog, why not a cat? But then when you're talking about the dog, Holly, was the dog actually real? Is what always popped into my head. Was the dog actually real? Because it could be, he talks about being hidden and he's been on his own. He's like starving and all that kind of stuff. So is the dog actually real, or is it just a figment of his imagination at the time to try to help him deal with what's going on?
Yeah, that's a good point, because it is out of like kind of his delirious state when, he's struggling to stay alive, that he thinks it's some kind of creature, large creature that's attacking him. So that's a good point, Jeanie.
Yeah, Jeanie, I would have to reread that again with that in mind, because I mean, it's probably been like 2 years since I've read this book. But yeah, I would be curious to reread it with that. And that would also play into the fact why, the dog does disappear at some point.
Exactly. And then, because he goes through, and this is the typical Poe when I'm reading it, because I'm looking at it from Poe's point of view, not a pro's point of view, but a Poe point of view. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. But it just seems that he's putting himself into a situation that just screams for the psychological, all the different psychologicals that you have to go through. Like, are those that he helps, take down the mutiny, and they kill everybody and they're the only 3 left, and then they get rescued by more. And then it's like, is this reality? I mean, is he having bouts of reality, or are these just figments of delirium being lost at sea, and kind of coming up with things like what is really there? Because when he starts talking about, oh, they're heading towards the South Pole, my thing is why the heck are you going to the South Pole? But okay.
Yeah.
It's cold down there. But then when he starts talking about bears and birds, and I'm thinking, what kind of bears are you seeing in the South Pole? Because there aren't bears in the South Pole. I mean, there's penguins. You got birds around the Galapagos, and then you've got the types of bears that you would find. Yeah. But you wouldn't see any polar bears. But he didn't specify. He did at one point say that they were white. So, like the polar bear in Lost, Will, right?
Yeah. Yes.
That was one of the things that threw me. It's like, yeah, this isn't real. But okay.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I was telling Jeanie that I didn't get to research like I normally do about a lot of things, because I did start re-listening to the book at the end of the week, and I seriously finished it probably 30 minutes before we jumped on here today. And one of the articles I did find, and somebody was really kind of breaking this story down. It was constructive, but it was also a little bit harsh. And they were saying, why did Poe add all these different animals in, like we know what all these animals are, or types of birds and things? Well, it's like, do your research. If you don't know, that's one more way to learn. My husband and I do a lot of, like, we're into birds. And so I know a lot about birds just because of that. But it's like, if I don't know about it, I'm going to go research it more, instead of smack talking about a story that can teach you something. And so I just thought that was really interesting. It's like, go do your research,
Yeah, Carmen, like we've talked about in here like 100 times, like he likes to like treat a lot of his, fictional stories as nonfiction, right? So he's actually treating this as if this is a real discovery, as if Pym is actually on a real discovery, and he's actually learning about all these things he's writing down. So for me, I think it's trying to weave a story of like making it more true. So when you read this, it's like, is this really happening? And I think that setup is, at least for me, clear from the beginning to the crazy ending where it's in like in a newspaper. I don't like where he posts kind of the end and like this is what happens in a newspaper, kind of treating it like these are real events that happen, and he just so happens to be told the story, and he is narrating it for us so that we can also share in this adventure. So to me, I mean, I didn't read the article you read, but it kind of sounds like they may have missed the whole point of the book a little bit.
I think that's a really Virginia. Go ahead.
And I was going to say, and think about it too, because when Eddie writes things, like he's, especially with, I guess we can say it more so with his poetry, when he writes things and he uses specific words, it is for a reason. And a lot of times in his attention in detail within his short stories and within this story as well, there's reasons for him using specific things. And so there's probably something, again, where if you do the research, you go, oh,
I get it.
It'll like there's always a reason for why there's so much detail to one item.
Absolutely.
And that makes sense considering that Poe is playing off of the tales that have come in the 1700s, because you've got the was it Swiss Family Robinson? No, what was it?
Robinson Crusoe.
What was the
Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah, Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah, Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah, Robinson Crusoe. And then you have the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which the end of Poe's novel is so, alluding to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, where he just leaves it wide open and there's this white, happening, and you're just going, well, that's not the way to end the story, but okay.
Yeah. And let's save the
typical Poe.
And let's save the ending. Let's talk about that a little later too. That's I can't wait. Go ahead.
A long time ago, many people didn't have access to a lot of photographs. And so they read in order to learn and to see mental pictures. And that's why, the 18th and 19th century writers used so much description, because that's the way people learned what so-and-so looked like. And also, going back to the dog for just a moment, I too thought that maybe the dog was a figment of his imagination, but when you all were talking about why is there no cat, it just occurred to me, well, maybe the dog was really a cat. His name was Tiger. And maybe he was confused, it was a Pomeranian and it looked like a cat, or he was hallucinating. But on the other hand, the Brady Bunch's dog was named Tiger, and he disappeared after the first season with no explanation.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
That's a good one.
They took him to Hawaii with them, and he just disappeared in the Hawaiian Islands. It's like, whatever.
He went into the cave with Vincent Price.
Oh gosh.
Well, and it makes sense. I mean, that calling it Tiger, and there are some cats that they grow to be the size of medium-sized dogs, especially the orange cats. We have a friend who's an orange cat, pretty much looks like he ate like 5 other cats.
Yeah, he's a Garfield. He's definitely a Garfield. Yeah.
He's definitely a Garfield. So
wasn't he in Newfoundland? Am I crazy? Didn't it say in the book that it was a Newfoundland?
That's the kind of dog he described. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that would make sense too, because if it's a Newfoundland, it's a type of like the Portugal poodles that they would take on the boats with the old days, that they would have those types of water dogs with them. It wasn't just cats, but they would take dogs too. But like Jeff said, it could have been a cat, it could have been a dog, it could have just been a figment of imagination. There's all those mixtures in there. And Poe, he didn't have just one mutiny. He thought, man, let's just throw in another one. Let's have a couple mutinies, let's kill everybody off, only leave 3 people, which I thought was ironic with the number. You got the numbers going on there with the 3.
Yeah.
Which also gave me a little the psychological and the spiritual side parts for that. And then
Yeah.
I loved how he described the captain of the Jane. What was the
Captain
Jane
boat
Guy.
that
Guy.
Shane Ballot. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I never couldn't understand that name. I was like,
Maybe
okay, I
it was
can understand
Jane
the
Gee
Jane.
French.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. That's
yeah,
very
Jane
true.
Gee. But I thought it was interesting that if it is French, that the way he described the captain of the French vessel was so like a poke in the face to the French, because the laissez-faire, and it's like he wasn't much of a captain. I was like, oh well, apparently Poe didn't like the captain,
Yeah. Well,
but
and
yeah, they decided to stick with him.
one thing that rereading this, one thing I noticed that I didn't, I think, really focus on before was this story is written as a story retelling in that first person narrative, but not, that's, I noticed that obviously the first time, but there's not a lot of dialogue at all. It's all from Pym's point of view of what's going on. And so then you question, how reliable is he as the narrator, especially with his delirious states, because he's starving almost through the entire story. And so you kind of wonder. And I think I'm wondering if that's what some people don't like about it, but they don't realize that, because so many novels are filled with a lot of dialogue. It just kind of a point I just thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a third person almost through first person.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. You know what's funny is when I read, I don't know, that I just never really pick up on that. Like, it's funny because, like, I know as a writer, I'm aware of where I'm writing, but when
yeah,
I'm reading, if the story is good, I don't really think about that. But yeah, guys, so mind blowing. It's so much. I actually believe now maybe it was a figment of his imagination, because I cannot believe in my heart that he could make a mistake like the dog disappearing. So
yeah.
that's like mind blowing. I actually have to
He's
go now and like move this book back up into my queue and reread it.
Yeah, well, because he's too technical of a writer
Yeah, he's
not
too much. Yeah,
to
it had to be deliberate,
check
right? It was
himself.
just too
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah,
Well,
crazy.
wasn't he writing this in a serialized format for a magazine? And
I think
he may have
so.
gotten
Yes.
confused. And there was
Yes.
one other error. I read that at one point he says that his friend told him something years later, but it was the friend who died just a few days or
Uh,
weeks later. So that was a
Mhm.
mistake too.
Yeah,
okay.
So
that
probably,
No,
that
he
he
may
was
was
talking to
be
his ghost.
yeah,
he
that may
was
be a
writing this a little at a time and kind of got confused. And I think one reason why it ends so abruptly maybe is that he was fired from that magazine around the time of
yes.
writing this,
Mhm.
and when he was fired, he figured, well, why bother? So he just abruptly ended it.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
realize that.
yeah,
Mhm.
Mel Grosvenor, who runs the Ohio Poe fans group on Facebook, she's awesome, and she and I were messaging because she's actually going to be a Gothic guest next week.
Woohoo!
Oh,
And she
Yay.
really wanted to join us tonight, but she's doing research for it's a steampunk convention in Louisville, Kentucky that's coming up. And she was like, please share my thoughts if you want to. And I said, oh yeah, she gave me some really good things. But she said that kind of going back to I'm having a hard time saying it too, Holly.
Jules
Jules
Verne.
Verne,
Jules Verne, yes.
his sequel to Pym, she said, is considered by many to be a first example of fan fiction, which is really kind of cool to think
Oh my
about.
goodness.
yes.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's really
I
cool.
agree.
And then one of the other things that she was saying that she really likes the quote, and I actually used this in the newsletter if you read it on Sunday, that a lot of people get wrong. Words have no power to impress the mind without the exquisite horror of their reality. And, that quote comes into the story right uh,
Shit, right?
right around the cannibalism incident.
Yes.
And one thing, and I like I talked to her before I was listening to that part of the book, and it is very interesting. Like there's that irony there of, Richard Parker, suggested the
Mhm.
whole thing, the whole idea of
Mhm.
it, and then he's the one that drew
Mhm.
the short straw. And
Mhm.
then the gulls, like they're dropping all this bloody flesh from something like the fish or whatever they're eating right at his feet. And so Poe really was brilliant with his writing right there to set up the whole cannibalism incident.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know what's funny about her kind of saying like that brilliant moment? I have to say, like, out of all the Edgar Allan Poe things I've ever read, I think there's a shining example in this story, which is exactly why I love Edgar Allan Poe. And it's that part when the plague ship is going by and he thinks that they're going to be rescued and he's smiling. And as the ship comes closer, as it drifts towards them, he can see that the corpses like lips are actually
Yes.
pecked away, and then you see all these teeth.
Mhm.
It was
Yeah.
written though, it sounds really, I mean, it is gory. I mean, like, I do find like,
Yeah.
it was the most beautifully written gore I have ever read. And I'm like, well, the first time I read this book, I must have read that like 10 times. It is exactly why I love Edgar Allan Poe. It was like exquisite, like just the way he actually took something so gross and actually almost put like a twisted beauty to it. Divine.
Yeah.
Best to me, best scene in the entire book. Plague ship going by.
Well, and now that you say that, Holly, I was going to say, yeah, it was the flesh that the gulls were eating from those
From that,
corpses, and
yeah.
yes,
So
because that's part of
good.
it too. Yeah, that foreshadowing, and Mel wanted me to bring that up, and it's just so eerie. And yes, it's like Poe took something horrific, like you said, and made art out of it
Oh
with
yeah,
the
I mean,
writing. With the writing,
I haven't even read anything comparable by another author. Because it's like how much gore is too much gore for them to actually say it like that. And not only
hmm
that, I mean, not only did they say it, I mean, it paints such a clear picture in your head. It's like you're watching a movie. Like you can
yeah,
see the whole scene. Like I said, I haven't read that book in 2 years, and I can see the whole as if I saw a movie of it in my head. It's just
hmm
really, I mean, the book is worth reading because I know a lot of people criticize this book, but it's worth reading just for that part because to
yeah,
me that's some of
Mhm.
his best writing right in that little section. It's just perfect.
yeah, and
And
like,
it can fit so much to what's going on in today's society.
hmm
Because if you watch the news, or I mean, it's not as plastered, but especially now, you have to dig for it about the articles of the ghost ships. And those are actual
Mhm.
ships that are, floating onto shore and beaching themselves, of North Koreans, that they're out and they're so hungry that they're going out and they're trying to find food and everything, but they're dying while they're out there because they have no food. And when these people are finding these ghost ships, they're just finding the flesh and bone of what's left
hmm
that's on that boat. And what they're
Mhm.
doing is they're just pushing those ships back out to sea,
yeah,
so because they don't want the infection or the plague or the worms. Actually, they're eat up with worms to infect the people around them. And it's
Yeah.
like, wow, the history. I got to bring the history into it, the history repeating itself and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
yeah, you've got the plague ships, you've got the ghost ships, you've got people that, were looking for better life, and they didn't care the turmoil or what it took. They had to go out because what they had behind them was no worse or no better than what they have in front of them.
hmm
And
Mhm.
so that's one of the things that I love how Poe likes to bring in the reality of what's going on in the times
yeah,
into it. And then if you read them and you look at them, there's a lot of reality in today's age that you can tie to it. And
Mhm.
it's very important that people know that and have that knowledge to know that, wait, things that happened 200 years ago are not that far off of things that we may be experiencing today.
yeah,
Yep.
Very
definitely
cool.
so. Well, I bring up also Richard Parker, and Virginia has the TARDIS, and I think everyone is aware of
Ah,
the reality of what happened in 1884, right? Correct? Everybody
yep.
knows.
Oh yeah. I mean, hey,
Um,
we did a podcast on it, so
yes, yes, yes. And it's just so surreal. And when you think about it, that how could Poe have predicted this and not even known? I mean, it's just so eerie.
all of the reality to it. Of course, you sit there and you scratch your head because you're like, wait a minute. The reality happened
Yeah. And
50 some years after this was even written.
right.
How? Because there's too much. I wish I had my notes sitting in front of me because I'm not in front of my notebook at the current moment.
Yes.
Maybe I'll get to it before the end of this podcast. But yeah, I mean, there's so much down to names. Now, of course, the name of the ship was different, but
there were 4 men.
there were 4 men. There was a Richard Parker. I mean,
Mhm.
it's kind of nuts. And believe it or not, he was not the first Richard Parker in reality to have had misfortune.
Yeah.
So it's just bizarre. Now, one of the Richard Parkers that did have misfortune fall upon him, who was a sailor, that happened before Poe wrote this. So did Poe maybe know about this particular mutiny with this particular Richard Parker that happened back in the 1700s? I don't know.
That's a good
He could have,
question.
maybe, but the reality of what Poe wrote about that actually does happen, like that's
Yeah.
it makes my brain hurt, but it's so bizarre and so weird. You cannot help but to look at that.
Oh, I know. And there's other things in some of the things he wrote that I'm not going to digress about, but
Oh, sure.
that it's like, hold on. He almost would have had to have come to the future to
Been there.
see. And
Exactly.
I have
Yeah,
to
go
interrupt
ahead.
really quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Will.
I have to get going.
Okay.
Please.
But if you guys, hopefully
Okay.
I'll see you guys in June.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
What-
See
what's
you
the-
next time.
What's the
Yes,
story
and-
going to be for next month?
Let's see. It is, I think we're doing,
Descent into the maelstrom, isn't it?
I
No.
think, yes, it's either
Yeah.
Descent into the, I think it's Descent into the Maelstrom, because we're also going to do the City in the Sea this summer too. So I
Okay.
can't remember which one comes
Ooh.
first. I can look it up. But
You can email me.
yes, absolutely, we will. And early
City
happy
in the
birthday.
Sea
I saw that in
is
the
next week,
comments.
next month.
Yeah, happy
Yeah.
birthday.
City in the Sea
Oh.
is next
Happy
week.
Thank you.
birthday,
Okay,
Will.
thank you, Dr.
Thanks a
Duff.
lot,
Yes,
guys.
yeah, it's the City in the Sea next month.
All right. Thank
So,
you.
all right, happy
Um,
birthday.
Bye, Will.
Thank you.
And
Bye,
speaking of
Will.
coincidences, coincidences do happen. You probably have read all of the coincidences between the assassinations of Lincoln and Kennedy.
Yes.
They
Sure.
both
Yeah.
happened in
Sure.
the 60s. Their vice presidents were named Johnson. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy, and Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln.
Lincoln.
And
Yep.
I've read a whole long list of
Mm-hmm.
coincidences between those two events.
Yeah, it's giving me chills just thinking about those kinds of things. It's just fascinating to think that it's like, how could this happen? But I mean, obviously it can, but I guess, of course, I want to say that Poe was a time traveler because I want to run into him one day.
Ding ding.
So here's
Ding,
a
ding.
coincidence, but kind of not really a coincidence. So
Mhm.
I had read that Edgar Allan Poe, when he wrote this, because his brother Henry was a sailor,
Yeah.
so a lot
Yes.
of that was influenced by him. But he kind of wrote Henry as Augustus and kind of used
Yes.
himself as Pym, which
Yeah.
kind of makes sense if you
Yep.
go to the ending. Like, we don't really know necessarily what happens to Pym, just like we don't really know exactly what happens to Edgar Allan Poe.
That's
like
true.
mystery
Yeah.
behind all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a little bit of the I kind of
Yeah.
always thought that was cool. I wonder how much of the story was based off his brother. I mean, we'll never know his brother's adventures and whatnot, but kind of cool to speculate.
Yeah, that's true. And one other thing I read, kind of tying into what you're saying, Holly, was with Pym being the creation of Poe, or Poe's creation of himself, just that the three names, the Edgar Allan Poe, Arthur Gordon
Oh
Pym,
yeah. I
and
heard
that kind of thing as well. That was one other little tidbit I read about.
And I wonder if Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were thinking of Pym when they named Ant-Man, Henry Pym.
Oh,
That's
my
right.
God,
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, how did I forget about that? Oh, bad me.
That's a really good add-on.
Oh my
That is cool.
God.
Yeah, it
Oh,
just
you know he
it's
probably did.
had to.
Well, and it makes sense because
Oh,
most of the time you have the Poe tie-overs or crossovers are in the DC universe
Mhm.
with
true.
Batman, and and then you
Yeah.
got the Marvel coming in, and Stan Lee was a part of Marvel and DC at one point.
Yes. He was.
So, you got the crossover with him there.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the first time I saw the title and I saw the word Pym, that's where I went to, was Ant-Man. I was like, and then it kind of made a little sense to me. And like with the three words, Arthur Gordon Pym, he, and I hate to say it with the tie-in now, is that most of serial killers in the world, they automatically give them the three names.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
you
they
always got Jack
do.
the Ripper. You've got,
John Wayne
John Wayne
Gacy.
Gacy. It's like they always try to add that third, and I mean, it's not
Most of the
it's not
time,
a
'cause Ted Bundy is
it's
an
not a
exception.
tie-in, but it's a coincidence
Yeah.
that is one of those to where you're like, huh. And then you think of Arthur Gordon Pym. You've got Augustus in the story, and then
Yeah.
the Gordon. It's like, I think of Gordon. I think of astronauts because I love the Friendship Seven. So I tie a lot of numerology and a lot of you know names and stuff like that. I try to throw them in there, and there has to be some kind of tie because history. I'm going to go back to that once again. Always likes to repeat itself,
Yeah.
and whether Poe is getting some influence from like the 1700s stories that I brought up, like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, or why can't I ever think of other than Swiss Family
Robinson
Robinson?
Crusoe.
Robinson Crusoe.
Daniel
It's
Defoe.
that R. I can remember the R, but that's all I can remember. So there's always some kind of tie. There's always some kind of influence, whether it be overt or covert or subvert for that matter. You don't know. It could just be a subconscious thing that's popping in your head. So,
Yeah.
but I like to think that Poe is, he could be a time traveler. He could be an interpreting. He could have been a seer. He could have been Nostradamus. Who knows?
Or Edgar
But
Or who?
exactly.
Edgar
Or
Casey.
Edgar Pym.
Yeah, Edwin Casey.
jeez.
So you never know. You have that tie and you have to think about those things. And what really gets me is that Poe's stories make you think,
Mhm.
no matter what it is, whether it's a poem, whether it's a story, whether it's a novel. There's always something about it that always strikes your imagination of going, I wonder if. And there's not a lot of that you can come into. Like, I love Shakespeare. I love acting it. I love reading it, whatever. But there's not a lot of Shakespeare that just makes me go, wonder what was going on at that time. There's just
Mhm.
some things about it, like, I love Macbeth. It's still my favorite. I love walking around going out, damn spot out. But it's not something that makes me wonder why. It just is like, oh, I love it because it is. But
Yeah.
Pose is always, I love it because it is, but I also wonder, why? What could have happened? What could be happening? What's going to happen? There's not a lot of that you get in certain stories because It just is. And that's one of the things that makes Poe so potent for me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm enough of the Poe
and
thing.
unique. And I want to jump back to the whole, like, DC Marvel thing, but mainly like with Stan Lee. So Saturday, Jeff and I went to Franklin, Kentucky to do an event. Jeanie couldn't go, and so Jeff was my um, wingman, heavy, because he carries all the boxes. But
Robin.
yes, yes. And so I said, I know we're not going to get to finish this because it's around 6-ish hours to listen to the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. And I said, but I think you're going to really like this story. And then if we'll stop it at a point, going up there and then coming back home. And then you can pick it up and read the rest of it, or I can tell it to you or whatever. And so at the beginning, when Pym's going into his thing, and then, then Poe kind of takes over with part of it and then goes back into Pym. He was like, pause it for just a second. And I said, okay. I said, what are you already like? This is too soon to be pausing to discuss anything. He goes, so you're telling me that Poe Stan Lee'd himself before Stan Lee'd himself? And I said,
Oh my God.
yes. So I thought that I just wanted to add that in because Poe did that. And how many other, Hitchcock, who is the other big director?
Stephen King does it.
Who?
Stephen King, but not as himself, but he shows up and stuff.
Yeah, he does. And it's the other one that did JFK.
Oliver Stone.
Yes, thank you, Leela. Yes.
Oh, you're welcome.
He does that too, Hitchcock and Stan Lee. And so I just thought that was really funny that, Poe kind of did that. And I don't know that anybody else had done that at that point that Poe did that. So it's just funny. All right. Any other thoughts on this book? How did everybody like it?
Yes.
Yes.
I do.
I did.
I really like it. And, like Jeff, you were talking about, how he does describe these things. And it is kind of that learning process for people that didn't have access to information. I like his long descriptions. I think some people don't just because they feel like, he and authors for that time frame, and even there's some even authors that do it now, they just go on and on. But to me, as descriptive as it is, I can use that imagery to paint that picture in my head. And Holly, kind of like what you said, I am creating my own movie in my mind while I'm reading it. And for me, that I need that when I'm reading. If I can't get that in my head and develop who the characters look like, I don't get interested in the story. And so Poe's writing does that for me. And this novel definitely did.
Yeah, because I know exactly what you mean, because I've read some things, like some fantasy books where it's like 3 pages about what her dress looks like. I'm like, I get it, it's a pretty dress.
Yeah.
But like I feel like the way that he just the way he writes it, to me, it doesn't feel dragged out. Because I know what they mean. Like, oh my goodness, I get it, right? It's like a shell of a turtle. Like, but no, like I really, again, it just goes back to him being so good at his craft and just really, I mean, like I said, his words are just so like perfectly chosen. I mean, to me, I didn't feel, and plus I'm a science dork, so I kind of, like, me personally, I enjoyed that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Other thoughts?
I don't want to dominate conversation, but I do have a thought to why people generally don't like this novel.
Okay.
Okay, so we all love Edgar Allan Poe. At least, well, I must say we all. I personally love Edgar Allan Poe because he does make you think at the end of a short story, even his longer short stories. I like the idea that there's gray, right? That kind of leads me to form some of my own conclusions and go back and kind of like weave through the story and be like, okay, well, what really happened? Which is great for a short story construct or a novella construct. But when we're reading novels, like this wasn't an overly long novel, but when we're reading like 6 hour, 8 hour, 12 hour, 22 hour novel, at the end, as the reader, we expect the payoff. We don't really want the gray.
That's
we
true.
want to know what happened. But
Yes.
he actually ends his novel more in you know, to be honest, I even like historically, haven't read every single classic in the world, but I've never actually read another novel from that time period that ends like I haven't read that Rhymes of the Ancient Mariner, so I can't really say. But to me, I kind of felt like we got to the end, and I did do the WTF, and that's why I went out looking for these other novels to finish the story for me, you know, because I'm only so creative, and I was just like, well, I really want to know what he thought. So, you know, for me, I think that we spend all this time investing in these stories, investing in these characters, and maybe the payoff for some readers isn't there. And for me personally, I felt like the payoff wasn't there, and I was so lucky because I feel like there's not even gray. Kind of like I until Dr. Jeff said, like I didn't realize, hey, maybe he got fired and he just was like, hey, forget this. But luckily, there are other novels for us to read.
Yeah.
For us people who maybe feel a little cheated after investing in that novel. But I mean, I think it's well written. I think there's like I said, it's almost broken into two different stories, which could have been like in today would have been like, you know, book 1, book 2.
Right.
Really, I mean, it's really excellent. I really, really enjoy it. Like I said, like I would recommend it. And then I would also recommend the additional reading as well, just because it's kind of fun to see it. I feel like that one from Jules Verne, which I think is actually the novel which actually inspired Jules Verne to be an adventure writer. It was actually that novel. I think he credits him with that. But like, yeah, and the other one by Charles Dake, I think how you pronounce it. Yeah, definitely. I liked it. I thought it was great. Like Edgar Allan Poe, really, except for the mommy story, maybe. Can't do anything but bad.
Well, all of you have said in the past that Poe was so ahead of his time, and that's why we love him in the 20th and 21st centuries. And this is another example, you know, this is not a romantic sort of novel, you know, a well-made story with an ending. It's more modern, like modernism of 20th century. Think of how Waiting for Godot has no ending, that play, and Hitchcock's movie The Birds just stops with no ending. We don't
Which
know
frustrates
what's
me.
going to happen.
Which frustrates me.
That's right. I just saw that. Yeah, there is no ending.
Well, and also too, the ending of Quantum Leap. I mean, I'm just gonna go right there because there's no ending to that either, and that still makes me angry. Like, you know, I still love it.
Yeah.
Much like I love this story.
Oh, I know. And so what do y'all think of this ending? Like, what do you think this large human like white being was? There was even a, you know, luminous, you know, light from the water when everything opened up, and I'm
I'm
curious.
just gonna come out and say it. I kind of thought it was a Yeti.
Okay.
Like that's my like that. I just kind of automatically thought, oh, he's seeing a Yeti. Great.
And with my whole tie-in to heavy science fiction, my thought was, is it aliens?
And that too.
Or perhaps one of the denizens of the hollow earth, you know, a different species. Or could it have been an angel coming to take him away, that he really is dying, and that's the end of the story.
That's true.
Maybe.
Yeah. Those are all good, you know, aspects of what it could be. Definitely. I was just curious.
That's the beauty of writing. That's the beauty of writing, of painting, even of song. You know, it's while the author had their clear intent of what it's supposed to be, it's, you know, up to the reader or the listener or the viewer to interpret it for their own selves. And what do they take from it?
Yeah. And I mean, and Virginia, kind of like with what you said with Quantum Leap, it's like, it's that ending that you want redone, and or like Game of Thrones, you want the whole last season redone. Yeah, we're not going to get on that, but there have been several shows I've watched that the ending was just lackluster, and I'm like, oh, come on, you could have done better. Don't give up on the writing.
Mhm.
But yeah, that it is very anticlimactic. But I think, Holly, I think you're right. I think that's what people don't like, because they want the Hollywood
Something more
ending.
concrete.
Resolution.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But as Dr. Jeff said earlier, and this was something I had forgotten about this particular story, it was in small, it was published in that magazine. And I cannot, for the life of me, maybe Dr. Jeff did say it, but the name of the magazine that this was published in, like if he had been fired at that time, maybe he wasn't finished writing the story yet and just said, okay, you fire me, you ain't getting the end. Too bad.
Yeah,
So,
I'm looking it up while we're talking.
It's in my notes, which I am still not to yet.
It's Southern Literary Messenger.
Oh, thank you,
It's
Jeanie.
Southern Literary
What's the
Messenger.
Okay.
Oh shoot! Right.
Yeah.
In
Okay.
1837, it was published in two installments in
Richmond.
1837, but was not
Yeah.
completed because Poe was fired from the magazine, and the full novel was published in 1838 in July without Poe's name, as it purported to be Pym's actual narrative, with a subtitle of comprising the details of mutiny and atrocious butchery on board the American brig Grampus on her way to the South Seas in the month of June 1827. So it's supposed to be, and Jane Guy, yes, it was a British schooner. So it was ventured to be told as something that really happened, as if he was experienced it, instead of being written and under Poe as a novel. That came later.
Yeah, kind of like.
Do you
Bram
think
Stoker?
Do you think Poe wrote that very last little bit, or did the magazine editor write it, saying, this is all we have right now, but we don't know what happened to him, but if we find out, we will print more?
I think so, because it goes on to say that the other survivor was in Illinois. So I think it was Illinois, Indiana. So that he would, you don't really know what went on with him because they didn't get in touch with him.
Okay.
So it could be a mixture of both. It could be that the literary magazine decided to end it like that in order to just say, oh, off into the wild blue yonder, nobody knows. Or it just Poe just decided not to finish it because he got fired.
Yeah.
Right.
And Carmen, what were you saying about Bram Stoker?
Oh no, I think Virginia mentioned Bram
me.
Stoker.
Oh,
yeah, go ahead. That's okay.
When Dracula was being published, he was trying to publish it as it was a real event, but the publishers were like, "No, we can't do that because it's going to send panic."
Yeah.
Yep.
But
that's originally how he wanted it done.
And that makes sense with the way he did everything, like, diary entries, journal entries, letters, and that kind of thing. Totally. Yeah, and Poe was known for doing these kinds of things. He did it with, I can't remember the years off the top of my head, but Facts in the Case of Monsieur Valdemar, people thought it was real, and the balloon hoax, they thought it was real. He was
real.
He was Orson Welles before Orson did it. He was
and it goes
hoaxing
along
people.
with that time period because of everybody and like phrenology and all the stuff that was floating around scientifically and paranormally, and so it just made it out that way. So
I spent the year of 2018 rereading Dracula on the exact dates, May 3rd or June whatever, or September so and so, and it took me the whole year to go through it.
That's a really cool way to reread it. Yeah. Oh, that
Thank
is
you
really
for that
cool.
idea. I'm going to take that and run with it.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Dr. Jeff, I actually just re-listened to it because Svengoolie had Dan Curtis's version of Dracula, which I absolutely loved.
Oh,
And I was like, before it was coming on, I was like, I want to reread it because I'm not remembering some things, and I'm like, I need it fresh on my brain. And so,
Yeah,
yeah.
I write about Matheson and Curtis's Dracula in my 3 books, and I think Svengoolie himself mentioned that Richard Matheson originally wrote a 3-hour script, which
Okay.
oh
would have
wow.
been even more faithful than it turned out to
Yes.
be.
Yeah.
Oh my
But then
gosh.
CBS said, no, we want just 2 hours. And so that's when they had to change Jonathan Harker's fate and leave out things and add things. But the 3-hour script, and Mark Dawidziak, our friend who has been
Mhm.
on, published
Yes.
the complete script in a book. And I have excerpts
Oh,
in my book,
okay.
Nights of Dan Curtis. But
Mhm.
if they had done the 3-hour version, Dracula would have looked old at first, and we would have
Yeah.
seen the gold coins fall out of his clothes, and
Mhm.
and even the baby in the bag that he brings to the brides.
Oh, wow.
Matheson had added all of those
Mhm.
things, and the rats. But even with the 2-hour version, it still is one of the best Dracula adaptations.
I really
I've
enjoyed
never
it.
seen it, so I have to
Oh,
watch it now. I have never
yes.
seen it.
And Holly, I think for a while it was on Tubi, which is free.
Yeah,
So
with my
so
husband if they get to that. Yeah,
yeah, check that out because it may still be on there. It's really good.
and
It
it's just
is
called
very,
Dracula.
yeah, and
Well, sometimes it's called Dan Curtis's Dracula.
yes.
Dracula. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Hmm.
1974, Jack
Yeah.
Palance.
Yeah.
1970.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out because I do love that novel.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's so good. It's so good.
Excellent.
Well, on that note, we're getting about to the end of our hour. One thing that Jeannie and I wanted to ask you guys, so we have City in the Sea, the poem, and Trisha Lee Shufeld is going to come on, and that's one of her favorites, and be our guest for Poe Unplugged next month and talk about it. And then we're going to do the descent or a descent into the maelstrom in July. And
Okay.
so
So
I
exciting.
kind of, instead of like talking to Jeannie and saying, hey, what should we do for August? And, because we like to keep kind of a flow of things to look forward to. What are some things that y'all would like to talk about in future Poe Unplugs? Any ideas off the like anything that has come up and you're going, oh, I wish we would read and talk about that.
Well, I knew Carmen and we had talked about this, but maybe even doing like a review of a Poe movie and just talking about like hey, we're gonna watch this Poe movie and talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or even like I was talking to Carmen too, like about what was it? Yeah, just maybe like even like television shows that were Poe based,
Yeah.
Uh, you know, that could be cool. Because I
Yeah.
haven't seen a lot of them and it would be great because I'd have an excuse to relax and watch a movie.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So just email us and let us know. I thought about sending out a survey to you guys, but if it's just easier just to email us, that's perfectly fine. And so, we were kind of keeping it very water based for the summertime with the two we chose for June and July, with
Right.
just thinking of summer and beach
Well,
and
this is
things.
kind of in theme too. So
Yeah, it is. It is. It kind of it flowed that way.
it flowed that way. Well, I have an idea for September, but I'll talk to you about that
Okay.
off
All right.
air.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, guys, I think we're about wrapped up. I really enjoyed this discussion tonight. Y'all brought out some really good points that I had not thought of, and I love that when y'all always give me things to think about and go back and reflect because everybody sees things differently, and that's the way Poe wanted it, and it's awesome. So
Yep.
And I want it known that you made me not talk about the ending. So I did not digress, and I did not go into the rabbit hole of religion. I want that noted.
Jeanie, you need gold stars and a trophy.
She does.
Exactly.
I'm so
I need
proud
rewarded
of you.
for that. So, but on that note, guys, I'm glad you joined us, and it was great, and we truly enjoy every week or
Yes.
month or however. I don't even know when we do this anymore. Just whenever Carmen tells me to. Okay.
Yeah. And June's Poe Unplugged is going to be June 18th. It is going to be a week earlier because I will be on vacation that following week. And I will be going through Ohio and up to upper New York. I guess you could say upstate New York. But I am going to get to go to Sleepy Hollow, so I'm very excited.
Oh, I've been there.
Exciting.
It's really neat. Yeah.
Oh, cool, Leila. I'm going to-
Tarrytown. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
have you ever been to Lyndhurst in Tarrytown?
Oh
New York?
yeah. You have to go there.
Yeah. Lyndhurst
neat.
was where the two Dark Shadows movies were filmed.
Yep.
House of Dark Shadows and
okay.
Night of Dark Shadows.
Okay. All right. Well, I will definitely put that on the list. So, but I think we're ready to end the evening, and thank you guys again, and have a good rest of May, and we'll see you in June.
See you
Good
then.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good
Till next time.
night.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Jeff, for the Lyndhurst.org. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Barbie ladies. Goodbye.
Okay, love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you next time.
Bye.